Julia will be giving us a talk. What does it mean for a conspiracy theory to be a theory? You can take it away.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. As this presentation will cover a paper I'm still working on, I look forward to your comments and questions. Okay, so in philosophy, many conceptual analysis of conspiracy theory have more or less focused on answering the question, what does it mean for a conspiracy theory to be about a conspiracy? And although the controversies of how to answer this question yield very interesting discussions, for example, whether or not a conspiracy should be conceptualized as necessarily requiring a nefarious purpose, multiple conspirators, secrecy, powerful architects, and so on, I propose to broaden the scope of philosophical inquiry into the conspiracy theories by answering a new question, namely, of course, what does it mean for a conspiracy theory to be about a theory? So my research more broadly focuses on the belief policies underlying belief in conspiracy theories with the aim of finding depolarizing means for friends and critics of conspiracy theories. I think I have to do it like this, right? I'm gonna have to put it like this because otherwise I can't see the rest of my screen. Okay. I will start out with some preliminary remarks about the conceptualization of conspiracy theory I adopt, which is a minimal definition. Next, I explain my motivation for answering this particular question and address, as many others have also done, the question of whether there are any true or mainstream conspiracy theories. I will then spell out my account of 3 different senses of theory that correlate to different epistemic evaluations of a conspiracy theory, and put these senses to work in describing 2 prominent views, namely those of friends and critics of conspiracy theories. And finally, I'd like to say a little bit about the generalism particularism distinction and how a conceptual delineation of conspiracy theory created as a response to the objections we may have against generalism may not be a viable point for a starting point for purposes of contributing to depolarizing conspiracy theory disagreements. Okay. So, in the philosophical literature on conspiracy theories, many have tried to establish a solid and I think quite commendable rejection of generalism, understood as the position that we are justified in our prima facie suspicion of all conspiracy theories. For some, the point is to get rid of the pejorative connotation of conspiracy theory because it feeds into something I call ideological segregation. So outright condemning belief in conspiracy theories has many nasty social and epistemic consequences, which I agree should be avoided. And for those who are interested in research of conspiracy theories with an eye on depolarization options, either for academic reasons, so for example, that it is interesting that normally rational arguments have no persuasive force or seem to have no persuasive force against some believers of conspiracy theories, so that there's something going on there what makes this topic interesting from an epistemic or argumentative point of view, or for social reasons, for example, to avoid that the new pandemic will lead people to decline medical services and withhold their children from such services as well. So for these reasons, I think it to be vital to get to the bottom of what brings people to become convinced that most conspiracy theories are either false, or what brings people to become convinced that most official theories are false. So I'm interested in an epistemically neutral approach to the concept conspiracy theory. And I hope to contribute to a better understanding of what such neutrality should look like or aim for. Some have conceptualized conspiracy theory in such a way that generalism becomes an unreasonable position. And others have conceptualized it in such a way that generalism seems the only reasonable position, for example, by including that belief in such a theory is irrational. So to avoid an evaluative rather than descriptive conceptualization, I consent to the following minimal definition, namely that a conspiracy theory is a theory about a conspiracy. And furthermore, I take it that a theory is minimally some set of propositions purported to explain a phenomenon. And a conspiracy theory then, as in the minimal definition too, is some set of propositions that appeal to the existence of a conspiracy purported to explain a phenomena. This definition suffices to illustrate that there are interesting conclusions to be drawn from the fact that we think of conspiracy theories as explicitly theories. So now to the question of whether there are any true conspiracy theories. I want now to delve deeper into my assumption that we think of conspiracy theories as explicitly theories and see where that takes us. So let's consider first the fact that for most people, it would be counterintuitive to consider the mainstream 9/11 accounts as a conspiracy theory. But why is that? Is the mainstream story not an account of an event involving a conspiracy theory or a conspiracy, and hence a conspiracy by my minimal definition? Similarly, most of us are not inclined to describe the Allies broadcasting misleading information about the location of their invasions to the Germans as conspiracy theories. But why is that if all the elements of a conspiracy theory, or at least in this minimal sense, are ticked off? The question then arises whether widely endorsed accounts of conspiratorial activities are conspiracy theories in the sense of the minimal definition, or whether we should revisit the minimal definition to make it align with our normal language intuitions, or put differently, our inclination to feel somewhat uncanny in describing such true conspiracy stories as conspiracy theories. So, and of course, as I favor retaining the minimal and neutral definition, I do not want to revisit the minimal definition, but there may be another way to address our intuitions about conspiracy theories, being those accounts of conspiracies that are unproven or epistemically wanting in some way. Put differently, can we somehow accommodate our intuitions about the pejorative connotation of conspiracy theory and remain neutral about the epistemic nature of such theories at the same time? And I believe we can, by acknowledging that the evaluative aspects of a concept come in after the descriptive aspects of a concept are laid down, as in the minimal definition. In his Routledge book on conspiracy theories, social psychologist Jan Willem van Prooijen sets the problem up like this. A conspiracy that is exposed and hence proven true is no longer a theory. Instead, it is an established example of actual conspiracy formation. Conspiracy theories are thus, by definition, unproven. So, importantly, Van Prooijen is not trying to defy the credibility of conspiracy theories altogether by saying that they are by definition unproven. Rather, he's arguing that for something to be a theory, it has to be something like an intermediate state of being under consideration and in need of more evidential support. But is that true for theories in general? Or does Van Prooijen mean that this aspect of theory is special for theories about conspiracies? I believe not. I believe that Van Prooijen has a specific kind of theory sense in mind. And by assuming that conspiracy theories are of that kind of theory, he disregards the fact that explanations of events may be considered theories regardless of their content. According to the minimal definition, a theory is some set of propositions purported to explain a phenomenon. The widely accepted explanation of a phenomenon, including a conspiracy theory, namely in the sense of an established example, actual conspiracy formation, as he puts it, is no exception to being a theory in this minimal sense, or so it seems. Of course, there is a difference between the two, but the difference does not lie in one being a conspiracy theory according to the minimal definition and not the other. For as we have seen, both are sets of propositions meant to function as explanations purported to explain some event. The difference lies in the epistemic evaluations of, respectively, the conspiracy theory, that is by definition unproven, and the conspiracy explanation that merits mainstream acceptance. Therefore, I believe that in talking about conspiracy theories, referring to an account of explanation as a theory expresses an epistemic evaluation of that account. There are three senses of theory that I'd like to discuss today. Firstly, there are theories in the sense of being an established account. Those are theories that are widely accepted explanations that have survived rigorous scrutiny and are considered true by most experts. Secondly, some explanation is a theory in the sense of being an hypothesis when it is an educated speculation that is meant to serve as a tool in discovering the truth. And finally, theories in the sense of being a hunch are conjectures that have not been subjected to careful reflection yet, and which need not necessarily serve as a tool in discovering the truth. So before I want to take a closer look at the characteristics of these three senses of theory, I have three notes. So first, in arguing that we can understand a conspiracy theory in any of these three senses, depending on the epistemic evaluation of that theory, is not to say that anyone who talks about or believes conspiracy theories is conscious of doing so with an epistemic evaluation of the particular theory in mind. So a conspiracy believer need not have reflected on the epistemic status of their pet theory in order for us to discuss what kind of status the believer would ascribe to this theory. Second, there are different levels of investigation of the epistemic evaluation we see fit for some theory. We could think of answering the question, what is the objectively correct epistemic evaluation of an explanation? Or what is, for some individual, the subjectively correct epistemic evaluation of an explanation? And while the former focuses on the knowledge available to all society about the evidence there is regarding the truth or falsity of a theory, the latter focuses on the knowledge available to the individual about the evidence. So what may be a justified epistemic evaluation of a theory for one individual does not have to match up with what is, in a more objective sense, the justified sense by which we characterize some theory. And third, these three senses are not precisely demarcated. On my count, there need not be a clear distinction between the different senses. Because the boundaries between these senses may be vague, I do not propose general conditions for distinguishing between, say, hypotheses and hunches, but rather represent them on a spectrum, as you can see in the slide below, with scientific theories or established accounts on one end and hunches on the other. And I will get back to this spectrum later on. I assume that all theories focusing on a consistent set of propositions for the theory to remain the same theory are theories in either one of the three senses to a certain degree. That is, some theory is an established account or hypothesis or hunch to a certain degree, depending on how strongly it resembles various established account making properties. Some theory may exhibit features of both hypotheses and hunches. And depending on the importance we ascribe to these features, we may argue that it is to be understood as either an hypothesis or a hunch. And the importance one ascribes to different features of the epistemic status of a theory may vary for different individuals. So having said that, I will now turn to what is a rough outline of some properties we may consider characteristic of each of the three senses. I want to stress that not much hangs on the specific description of these properties that I'm proposing here. What's important is that we get some sense of the differences between the senses. So some properties, firstly, that may be found established account making are that established accounts are consistently making accurate, falsifiable predictions, are being supported by evidence from various sources, consistently having withstood scrutiny by experts and being accepted by most of those. One possible example of a theory in the sense of an established account is the heliocentric theory. Most would agree that it displays all of these characteristics above and can therefore be considered an exemplar of an established account that is proven beyond doubt. This is not to say that the heliocentric theory is necessarily true, as established account-making characteristics are not necessarily truth-conducive. However, although established accounts may turn out false, their epistemic status is, for those who accept this epistemic evaluation of the theory as an established account, indicative of the warrant one has for believing the theory. Similarly, some properties that could be said to be hypotheses making are that those are being proposed for the sake of argument as a starting point for research where it can be verified or falsified. And they build on established accounts, being informed by existing facts and hence described as educated, and that they make predictions that can be tested and by which the hypothesis can also be falsified. So one possible example of a theory that most would agree meets the hypothesis characteristics is string theory. So in searching for solutions to the problem of quantum gravity, physicists propose string theory as a starting point for research based on limited evidence and an explanation making predictions that can, at least in theory, be tested, formulated after considering alternatives that merit systematic arguments and serve as a means in finding the truth. Again, not truth conducive, but meant as a tool in finding the truth. Okay. And finally, some suggestions that figure as hunch-making properties. Those are serving social, not intellectual goals per se, resulting from limited evidence and being subjective, being proposed in a casual context where no prior scrutinizing into alternative explanations for the phenomenon is required for others to consider the theory as a viable explanation. So suppose that A is saying the following to friend B: although Mo cannot really explain why or what supports their theory that Dominic is responsible for the mess in the public library, the feeling of unease as Dominic entered and saw the clutter said enough. In this example, the sense of theory that A would ascribe to Mo's theory is plausibly that of a hunch, although, of course, theories may develop and become more hypothesis-like or established account-like. And most theory may be supported by evidence quite shortly after A said the above, the example, to friend B. So it seems right that unless A or B have any further information about the epistemic status of most theory, the relevant theory exhibits more hunch-making properties than established account or hypothesis-making properties. Okay, so now that I've given a rough outline of some of the characteristic properties of these three senses, I will illustrate how these senses are seen to work by giving an example. Suppose that Otis, an evolutionary biologist, tunes in on a forum for young Earth creationists and joins a discussion board on the development of animal species. Otis comes across arguments from a leading figure in the young Earth creationist society, Bobby, who at some points argues that evolution theory is also just a theory. Evolution theory is also just a theory. And even some biologists say that alternatives are not off the table. Evolution theory contradicts Bobby's belief in young Earth creationism. Bobby therefore has a stake in evolution theories being false. More specifically, in unconsciously undercutting the warrants people propose to have for believing evolution theory and demoting it from an established account to an hypothesis, from the result of thorough investigation to a means of obtaining such a result, Bobby has created room for alternative explanations. These alternative hypotheses may be assigned some credibility on their own and could even merit a similar epistemic evaluation. If evolution theory was not just a theory, then this would obstruct alternatives meriting credibility, because evolution theory would be the only credible explanation in accounting for the development of animal species. So the epistemic evaluation of evolution theory as just a theory, that is, as just an hypothesis, allows for wiggle room in determining the truth about the development of animal species. According to Otis and most others, however, this epistemic evaluation of evolution theory is underestimating the evidence for evolution theory, and therefore too pessimistic. Otis thinks evolution theory is not just a theory, but rather believes that it meets the standards of an established account. In this sense, Bobby ascribes a lower epistemic status to evolution theory than most others. This case shows that there are differences in the subjective epistemic evaluations of theories and the accompanying senses of theory, but also that there's something in a more objective way to say about the epistemic evaluations of theories. If most others side with one of the epistemic evaluations of a theory, the other evaluations become seemingly unwarranted, or at least bear the burden of proof with respect to the alternative they maintain. However, this doesn't mean that these evaluations are unwarranted, just that most other people have a reason to think that they are. The evidence available to them and the importance they ascribe to the theories meeting certain established account-making properties led them to believe that the established account sense of theory is the correct one here. But importantly, they may be wrong, and the lone wolves diverging from the dominant view may be right. Furthermore, which epistemic evaluation we consider justified for theory may be based on one's political ideology, social factors, situational considerations, and the like. So as we saw with Bobby, ascribing some epistemic status to a theory might be motivated by religious beliefs, which presumably raises the stakes for them to deviate from the dominant view of the epistemic valuation of that or some other rival theory. So individuals' evaluations of a theory may line up with the objectively correct epistemic evaluation for the wrong reasons, or may diverge from it, even though the individual is aware of the evidence guiding the objectively correct epistemic evaluation. People make mistakes, and the epistemic picture is not the only relevant picture here. Then next, I want to show how I believe that the minimal definition and three senses I just described make up somewhat of a framework in which we can explain some aspects of conspiracy theory-induced polarization. Consider the following figure. The general view I described here illustrates the perspective of those who do not believe conspiracy theories and who do typically believe the dominant alternative or official theory. On this view, the official theory resembles an established account in that it, for example, is the result of expert investigation, it's widely endorsed, supported by evidence from multiple sources, subjected to rigorous scrutiny, etc. Some official theories will bear a stronger resemblance to established accounts than others, and this may, again, differ for different individuals, where the other theories may also resemble hypotheses in some respects. So in contrast, the conspiracy theory is most often associated with something like a hunch, in that it, for example, is not the result of expert investigation, believed more likely for intuitive or ideological reasons than reasons having to do with facts, is mere speculation or conjecture, and is not, or not sufficiently supported by evidence, not systematically delineated, more likely susceptible to confirmation bias than peer review, etc. Some conspiracy theories will bear a stronger resemblance to hunches than others, where the other theories may also resemble hypotheses in some respects. So on this view, the general view, it is difficult to empathize with those who believe in conspiracy theories. They seem to take an unjustified leap from one end of the spectrum, where the theories merit the consent of epistemic experts, widespread endorsement, and more than sufficient evidential support, to the other end, where theories lack these epistemic qualities altogether. For those who sympathize with the general view, it is too epistemically risky to believe in conspiracy theory. Clearly, on the general view, those who do believe conspiracy theory, a conjectural hunch based primarily on intuitions rather than facts, are irrational in doing so. This line of reasoning may explain, at least in part, the pejorative connotation so ubiquitously associated with conspiracy theory. Those who believe conspiracy theories will, of course, disagree with the general view, for it is implausible that they will have similar epistemic evaluations of the theories they believe to be true, for example, as hunches based on intuition rather than facts. The view of conspiracy, those who do believe conspiracy theories, look somewhat like this. The minority view illustrates the perspective of those who disbelieve official accounts of specific phenomena and do typically believe conspiracy theories about these phenomena. On this view, the official theory no longer resembles an established account. Rather, the official theory is seen as an hypothesis, as it, for example, is not supported by impartial evidence, etc., etc., etc. So the minority view can be seen to downgrade the official theory from resembling an established account to a hypothesis. In contrast, the conspiracy theory is no longer considered a hunch, but also as resembling a hypothesis. The conspiracy theory is purported to be, for example, educated and an alternative possible explanation, etc., 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 and a manifestation of truly open-minded research. On this view, an official theory and conspiracy theory about the same event are somewhat on a par. Both have merits, and neither has the sole claim to the truth. The difference between the two theories is that the former was orchestrated by agents powerful enough to consider or undertake mass manipulation and deception, and who may very well have a lot to gain from fooling the masses, while the latter is not. A common feature of the conspiracy mindset is the idea that the masses are gullible for believing the official theory without any critical reflection. If individual research enterprises are encouraged to decide between conflicting theories explaining the same event, for if the official theory is also just a theory, in the sense of just an hypothesis, but is orchestrated by people who had a political agenda in doing so, then it seems irrational to just believe the official theory, qua being the official theory. Okay, first, about the polarizing aspects of conspiracy theories and the generalism particular distinction. It is important to say that I take it that a thorough understanding of both sides of the polarized debates is vital for depolarizing conspiracy theory induced disagreements. I take it that it is not only a thorough understanding of the arguments that convince people to believe a conspiracy that is vital, but more importantly, the belief policies underlying such arguments. I've already hinted at the notion of belief policies in the beginning of this presentation, where I discussed, for example, the established account-making properties or hunch or hypothesis, which properties we find important and how much weight we assign to such properties are instances where we can see belief policies at work. I take Paul Helm's study on belief policies as a working framework, who argues that no theory of knowledge is complete without standards for accepting and rejecting evidence as belief worthy. These standards are not themselves determined by evidence, but determine what counts as credible evidence. They are norms about what one should believe and what one should not believe in certain evidential and non-evidential circumstances. And like other norms, they are more straightforwardly analyzable and perhaps even amendable than the outcomes they produce. Furthermore, belief policies, more than the content of specific beliefs, tell us something about the epistemic character of an individual and allow us to make some kind of a belief profile of that person. So why discuss belief policies? Well, I believe that thinking about conspiracy theories in terms of the generalism particularism distinction is suboptimal if our goal is to contribute to depolarizing strategies. For depolarization, we have to stay close to the actual problems at hand, and one of these problems is often overlooked in the existing framework. That is, namely, that conspiracy theories are sometimes believed in a way that is flexible. So there may be multiple alternative conspiracy theories that are maintained at the same time, even if they are mutually exclusive. Just focusing on the rationality of believing one of those alternative conspiracy theories seems like an unproductive way to come to understand the epistemic considerations of the believer. If particularism is understood as saying that we can only say something about the rationality of a conspiracy theory by looking at its own merits or demerits, then the flexibility with which conspiracy theories are often believed is a problem for further research by which we come to understand the conspiracy theory believer. The epistemic evaluations of conspiracy theories may change for an individual over time. The objective epistemic evaluations of conspiracy theories may also change over time. The belief policies underlying such changes may change over time, but there is an important difference here. Belief policies, unlike specific theories, cannot be rationally held in an inconsistent way at some time t. Although I believe generalism to be the wrong term with which to continue our research of conspiracy theories, I do think that there is something to say generally about the way in which conspiracy theory believers, and importantly, other believers alike, abuse specific belief policies to maintain the explanation of an event that suits their epistemic or social interest best. In general, it is the flexibility and the malleable nature of belief in conspiracy theories that is left out the picture by framing the philosophical debates in terms of the particularism generalism distinction. Specifically, it is both the changes in the content of the theories that are maintained by a conspiracy theory believer and the epistemic evaluations an individual sees fit for various conspiracy theories that are disregarded if we think of belief in conspiracy theory as a rigid thing that will be more or less rational for all those who believe the theory, whether it is for the generalist reasons or the particularists. And although belief in conspiracy theory is a flexible thing, what lies at its foundation maybe not. Belief in conspiracy theories is an ordinary thing, at least that's what we hear. And like with other ordinary epistemic practices, we can distill the belief policies underlying those beliefs, helping us first to increase our understanding of the grounds for the belief, second, the nature of the reasons for the belief, third, to discover more salient insights about a person's belief system, fourth, to make predictions about what those belief policies might also lead to in the future, and five, appeal to an aspect of one's belief system that may be more under our control than the beliefs that stem from it. So yeah, I kind of powered through at the end, but that's it. I'll stop my share now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Julia, for a very, very interesting paper, which raises some interesting questions about the way in which we want to then take the work on the theory of conspiracy theory and apply it to the kind of debates we're seeing going on in our cultures at the moment around COVID-19 and the like, given that polarization does appear to be a major issue, particularly in the US, where this conference is officially being hosted given political situations going on there. As we wait for people to put their questions into the Q&A thing, I found it interesting when you were talking about the distinction between the three senses of theory, the notion we have established accounts, we have our hypotheses, and we have our hunches. You talked about the heliocentric account, because of course my first thought when you talked about that was, of course, the geocentric account was an established account back in the day. It was well attested to survive testing and the like. I like the way you conceded that established accounts don't have to be veristic. They simply have to be the common wisdom of the day, and that gives them a certain amount of warrant whether they're true or false, which of course is going to be reflective on things like the Moscow trials and the like.
Yeah. Thanks for your comment. Yeah, I think that's. I think it's very important that we keep the flexibility somehow, and not just say that this is true forever and ever and ever, and it cannot change. It can change. It must change also, otherwise we would still have the geocentric theory as our established account.
Yeah, and that of course. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Brian.
No, I was going to add to that because I thought your invocation early on of debates over creationism kind of point to another kind of wrinkle in all of this. Is it's not just, you have the established theories and then there's the hunches, but there's competition between groups of establishers, right? So in the case of creation theory, right, if you're an average citizen trying to figure out how to think about the nature of the earth, there's one established theory in the biology textbooks and the things you learn about in school. And then on Sunday morning, you have another group of experts with who are experts on religious theory and on the Bible, and they have an established theory that is in conflict with it, right? And then your choice as a believer is actually a choice between two different establishments, and that's a different thing. And I think it actually reflects nicely what we're dealing with, at least in the United States now, where we have two different establishments, one saying the election was perfectly fine, it was the fairest election we've ever had, and then another group of individuals with a similar amount of power and a similar amount of appeal to establishment saying, no, we think it was completely wrong and it was completely stolen. And so you have two political parties that are making two different claims, but they both have kind of an equal claim to being the establishment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's up to the individual in some cases, most cases, to decide which they find more established than the other. And that will depend on which properties they correlate with established accounts and which of the alternatives satisfies more of those properties than the other. And I think those are the belief policies underlying the eventual choice of the belief they come to maintain. And I think that's where at least some of the philosophical work should lie, like how to understand these belief policies and how can we, I don't know, bring friends and critics closer together if there's a mutual understanding that both find it most important to, for example, believe the evidence of the experts they find trustworthy. Same belief policy underlying both choices. They're not that different, at least I believe.
Thanks.
Yes, I also wonder whether to a certain extent we could actually extend the analogy slightly further. So we all know that scientific theories have changed over time. So whenever we talk about theories in the sciences, we're not saying that these are, to use an analogy, the word of God writ upon a stone tablet. We accept that theories change as new information comes in. And scientists challenge scientific orthodoxy all the time. And there's a system built into the scientific endeavor which allows us to engage in that kind of activity. And yet we don't seem to have a similar mechanism, at least when it comes to these things called conspiracy theories, that we recognize as a pull and tug to that kind of debate. It's either they're false or they're true. We don't talk about the kind of emergence or development of these theories over time. So maybe we could look at the way that established accounts change in the scientific sense and then start going, well, why aren't we modeling that process for other theories? Why is it only the scientific theories that get treated in this particular way?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that at least some conspiracy theory entrepreneurs or promoters are in some sense comparable to the scientists considering multiple alternative theories to be credible as well, or maybe plausible. So when I was talking about the flexibility of conspiracy theories that are maintained, I think this is the point, that one conspiracy theory believer doesn't have to commit to one specific narrative necessarily. They commit to disbelieving the official theory while maintaining multiple alternatives which have credibility of their own, right? I see that there are not really questions, but I also understand that that's really late for most, right?
Yes, I think for the North American and Australasian audience, unfortunately, this has now gone into the wee hours of the morning. For those of us in mainland China and Central Europe, of course, it's all a fully functioning part of the day. Of course, tomorrow's session is very much designed around people in Central Europe, which is also very badly designed for poor Brian, who is going to try to muddle through tomorrow night, I believe, although I've been given his phone number so I can wake him from his slumbers if I see him nodding off. You'll have to keep your video live all night long, Brian, so I can see when your head begins to dip.
I was recording all night so that I'll have something to project up on the screen and hopefully fake you into thinking that I'm still here. So.
Interesting. I might have to just send you random messages just to see how you react.
So Julie, I was just going to have one last question for Julie, because I'm not familiar with the Helms belief policies literature. Are there real cases that they investigated, things like the creationism versus evolutionary theory case? I mean, because if it was published in '94, there's a lot of real cases at that time they could have engaged with, and I'm just kind of curious.
No, the answer is no. No, belief policies were, at least by Paul Helm, designed to get around doxastic voluntarism and find something more substantial to say something about. And I think I would want to leave that behind. I just would want to think of them as evidential norms that we can see as each individual having a set of, and which may change, of course, all the time. But I think that the fact that believing one conspiracy theory often leads to believing more is a great signal of there being belief policies, maybe like only believe propositions which are not orchestrated by people in power with a political agenda for asserting that proposition, something like that.
Actually, so we do have a comment from Charles, and this is high praise indeed. Love the paper, Julia. I kept on thinking of questions which you anticipated.
Thanks, Charles.
Yeah, so no, that is, and I must admit, I agree. I kept on making little stars in my notes, and then you would immediately give a response to that. Okay, so well, that's that question just completely gone.